Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to CMO Online Canada. My name is Hamish Taylor and I am going to be your moderator for this afternoon. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a minute, but fortunately we have a group of CMO all across Canada that have joined us this afternoon and a panel which have graciously volunteered to give us some of their views while we're at it. Those of you familiar with CMO events will know that normally these are a day-long function where we get together physically at a hotel in a nice city somewhere and are able to meet with our peers, talk to senior marketing people in roundtable discussion, in panels, and often as a keynote speaker or an expert. Clearly, the current situation means that that's not possible at the moment. So instead, what the CXO group have set up are a set of these panels where at least we can stay connected to a certain extent during the current crisis. As I say, my name's Hamish Taylor. I am a marketing person by background. I was trained as a brand manager at Procter & Gamble and then moved on to be head of brands at British Airways before moving into chief executive roles later. And I have to say, even as a chief executive, if I'm honest with you, I still saw myself as a marketeer. I was still #1 brand manager in whatever organization I was at. And I think, I do a lot of work around the world with companies nowadays on customer centricity and how do you genuinely get the customer at the center. And the current crisis, I think, has highlighted for me more than ever the importance of the role of marketing in our organizations. If you think about it, what's the biggest risk any business faces? It's not IT risk, it's not regulatory risk, it's customer risk. If you've got no customers, you've got no business. So actually, during the current crisis, the most important thing is to maintain our relationship with our customers, to find out how they're feeling, to help them survive. Because if they don't survive this, we don't survive. And I would argue, I would say this anyway as an ex-marketeer, but I would argue that as a chief executive, the most important person around my table at the moment is the one who's looking after my customers. And that means you guys. I really think there's a big role. Yes, CIOs are important because the technology is important at the moment. But what's that technology for the sake of? Helping us address our customers. Yes, HR is important because it looks after our people. But what are our people doing? Our people are there because we have customers that want to bring them in. So the customer is at the core of absolutely everything. And I think that gives us a huge opportunity as marketeers to step up to the plate and really show what we can do during this. And luckily, we've got some really good people that are coming on stage to talk about their experiences at this. And hopefully you'll be able to join in as well as we go through. As we go through today, you'll notice there's a tab to the right of your screen. There's a chat tab there. And the chat tab allows you to put in any comments or any thoughts that you may have. It's your opportunity to ask any questions you want on the way through. We're not necessarily going to address them all today, and I'll explain that in a minute. But do ask if there's any questions that arise for you through this or that you'd like to see addressed in a future session. Please do put them on, let us know, and we'll listen to that and we'll see what we can do for future sessions. There is also a polls tab, and when we've heard the predictions from our experts that are coming on in a minute, we're going to give everybody a chance to vote as to which one of these future states you think is the most likely to hit you in your business moving forward. So without further ado, I think what I should do is introduce our experts on the stage. And the first person I'm going to introduce you to that's volunteered to come and join us today is Danielle Brown. And Danielle is the CMO for the Canadian Textile Points. She's an expert when it comes to things like loyalty schemes and trying to get to your favorite hotel or get on your favorite airline. And of course, she's coming from an industry that has been hit very, very hard, one of the hardest hit by the current crisis. So I'm sure she'll have some very, very interesting perspectives for us in a minute or two. So welcome, Danielle, first of all.
Thank you, Hamish.
Second up, I've got Mathieu. Now, Mathieu Aubrey-Lachapelle is the head of digital marketing for LCI Education. And what they do is provide digital experiences for campuses. They've got about 23 campuses they work with around the world. And I think the thing that interests me about the challenge, I guess, in Mathieu's world is the fact that, when we're all starting to learn about the digital age and how to cope with it, or I am, at least you're a bit younger than me. But I suspect your audience for all of this are pretty digitally literate as well. So I suspect you've got a fairly discerning audience out there, Mathieu, in what you do. So Mathieu, welcome to you.
Hi, thank you.
And then we have also, good to see you. And we also have with us Amy Ballard. And Amy is the Director of Sales and Marketing at Ritz-Carlton Paradise Valley, which is the brand new development near Scottsdale in Arizona that's been developed at the present moment. And again, for a different perspective on things, Amy's coming from an environment where she's creating marketing and sales programs where she hasn't actually got anything to sell at the present moment because they're not actually open. They're in the pre-launch stage. So again, I suspect the idea of trying to do marketing when you've got nothing to sell may be familiar to a few of us just from the last few weeks or so. So 3 very different perspectives that I'm really looking forward to hearing. And the other person that I do want to mention before we move into it is Kristen Dorsey, who's listening in as part of the audience for this. And Kristen comes from our sponsors, Vision Critical. And these events, those of you that have been to the live events will know these events only work because there are sponsors there that help us all through it. And Vision Critical have very kindly agreed to sponsor tonight or this afternoon's event. And they are experts, as you're probably aware, in customer intelligence. And given the fact that our customer intelligence has all just been thrown out the window in the last few weeks because they're all living in a completely different world to the one they were before, I suspect anything that comes up around the area of customer insight will be of great interest to Kristen, as we go through this. Apologies, I keep saying afternoon and evening instead of where else, because whereas you guys are all in Canada, I'm actually coming to you from Edinburgh in Scotland, where I'm based. And I looked into one of the events a couple of days ago, and the moderator there in New York had a lovely picture of sort of Manhattan with the Empire State Building up behind him and all this sort of stuff going on. And I felt very jealous. So I decided I really wanted a picture of Edinburgh Castle or something behind me. But unfortunately, my knowledge of the technology wasn't up to it. So I'm afraid you've got to put up with my bookcase and a picture of St. Andrews. That's all you get, I'm afraid. So anyway, let's get into things quickly before you get fed up with me. I'm going to turn to Danielle first. And Danielle, what I'm going to ask you to do is spend 2 or 3 minutes just talking a little bit about your background, what brought you to where you are today, and then take us through your prediction. What you think is the big thing that's coming over the horizon that we've all got to be aware of. And then when we've heard all 3 by about maybe in about 10 minutes or so, we'll open up the poll to other people and we'll have a sort of broader chat. But let's kick off with you and your prediction. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Hamish. Yeah, I'm at Points. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Points. I've been there for 6 months. I had been there previously for 3 years. Left for about 3 years to do a little stint at a tech startup and then at an e-commerce startup, and now came back to Points as the CMO with this responsibility for marketing and all of business operations. And so maybe this gives me a unique perspective, but what I've been thinking about a lot is change and how now we irrefutably know that the world as we know it can change in a matter of weeks or days, and how change is going to be less of a thing that we have to get through and more of a constant state, which then got me to thinking about this state of radical fluidity that I'm thinking about. So it's planning windows, planning processes, they're drastically different. And if you lean into this state, it's freeing. So I don't know about you, but while the world at large has been presenting me and my teams with more challenges than I could have ever predicted, the world inside our company walls has been so willing to help and collaborate in these new ways that I've never dreamed possible. And all those, those old ways that people were clinging to that you always wished would change, and you're like, damn it, why do we do things this way? They're all being pushed aside. So even our traditional understanding of people's roles and responsibilities have changed. I have a life cycle marketing manager who's been seconded onto the project management team because I thought she'd be great and I needed a resource there. Same with customer support. They're learning how to code because we needed a resource there. And our marketing roadmap that took us months to build in the space of days had to get thrown out the window, and we built a new one in the space of days. So there's this freeing sense of not being stuck, and it's embracing this radical fluidity as a constant state, to needing to move, to needing to adapt. And I don't think that's just this current crisis. I think this is needing to find new ways to be able to be nimble and fluid.
And that presumably puts a lot more pressure then on our insight, on our looking outside, understanding what is changing in the world, to be able to work out how quickly we need to change. You can't look at a market research report anymore that's 6 months old because it's no longer relevant.
Right. And I think what this allows you to do, though, it's that notion of, how we all need to get better at failing. This almost frees you to be able to say, okay, I can make a step because I don't need to be certain. I can dip a toe in and try something. And if things are fluid, it's actually easier to accept failure and try new things because the world isn't certain and you're not going to have the answer.
So what's a typical marketing department going to look like in 2 years' time then, do you think? What's going to be different from today?
I think it's less about, so if I think about my marketing team, I have data scientists, I have performance marketers, I have brand and content marketers, and they're very specialized in their roles. I think the marketer of the future, while we were generalists and then became specialists because technology required us to specialize, now that technology becomes part of our general lexicon, it's going to allow us to become generalists again and be able to be a performance marketer who may have a data science background, or be able to be a brand and content person who's really, really well versed in performance marketing. I think the need to be fluid is going to necessitate for different skills and a broader range of skills.
That sounds quite exciting then for the future of marketing, in the sense that, you know, when you get organizations where marketing is general management, like a Procter & Gamble of this world, or for example, where they're running a P&L and running their brand, you know, they tend to have more influence on the business because they're not specializing, just being seen as the coloring in department or the digital people or whatever else it might be. And as we become more generalists in marketing, I guess, it means presumably we've got more chance to really impact on the strategic side of the business, but also presumably it means you've got to recruit different type of people.
Yeah. And so that, I think that's where it comes back to the fluidity part, right? And you're really looking not at it, the challenge is going to be to get broader in the knowledge and skill set without losing the depth, right? And that's what happens when you get more generalized. So I think what happens on the recruiting side of it is you're recruiting for a mindset, a willingness to learn, and a willingness of a certain type of person who's going to move at the speed that you need your business to move at.
Excellent. Great. So fluidity, changing roles and responsibilities. It's going to be a very different world we're going to be living in. Superb. I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes when we get into the general discussion. What I'd like to do is see if we can get all three predictions on the table so we can get the vote going. And then we're going to come back into a general discussion in a minute or two. So just for the short term, thank you very much indeed, Danielle. That's great.
Thank you.
Good. I'm going to bring Mathieu up next. We'll bring Mathieu on stage. And Mathieu, I think, is going to talk to us a little bit about experiences and how we create different types of experiences going forward, and how maybe that needs to change. But first of all, let's hear a bit more about you, Mathieu, and your background and where you come from.
Hey, Matthew. I'm from Montreal, Canada. I'm currently head of digital for LCI Education. My background is mostly in digital transformation. I've been in the business for about 15 years, worked in media, real estate, loyalty. Danielle and I probably have a couple friends in common. I spent a year and a half at AMIA, Aeroplan, sort of media, also real estate, e-commerce, doing digital transformations and the like. My prediction is far more interesting than me, so I'll just go into the content as opposed to talking about myself. I think when you're looking at generating growth, I think the pillars on which you do them are shifting to purposeful experiences and to things that connect with humans on a more holistic level than the previous sort of concepts of experience. If you're looking at education, for example, even if we operate in a very sort of technology digital environment, we specialize in creative industries like graphic design, video game design, visual effects design. There are still moments that are ingrained in the human spirit associated with education that are very, very, very strongly linked to physical proximity, right? When somebody thinks of graduation, nobody thinks of a computer screen. They all think about tossing the hat up in the air. And when people think about open house and orientation, they have this sort of classic American movie scene where everybody walks into campus at Harvard and meets everybody else and shakes hands and hugs and goes into the dorm room. So my prediction is along the lines of growth and success post-COVID will come from creating meaningful and purposeful experiences online in places where the default human association prior to that was around physical proximity. So, and without going into platforms or how that's going to happen, I think that kind of emotional connection between the humans and the brand, whether it be a school or a concert or an event or whatever it may be, is going to be a very, very strong driver for growth moving forward.
I think that's a really interesting one also in places like the retail world, where in recent years, the retail world have had to learn how to compete with the Amazons of this world. And the only way they've been able to do that was by creating a physical experience that makes it worth visiting the shop. So things like Apple stores where you can go in and actually play with the computers and talk to an expert, or cinema chains that have tried to make it much more of a night out than just going to watch a film. And I guess what you're highlighting is that in the new world, you've actually got to use digital means to create those experiences as well.
To an extent, yes, you do. I mean, Amazon made a very successful bet that people didn't like going shopping that much, and that if you could bring stuff to people, and they've been immensely successful, obviously. But I think that in terms of creating experiences, there are moments and there are events and there are situations where human emotions and human perception is still very close to proximity. And if we can recreate these experiences in a meaningful and purposeful way, then there's a very strong driver for growth moving forward.
I mean, are you able to give an example of something that you guys are doing in the education field that would be different from what you maybe were doing 5 years ago?
Well, we're going to be operating a series of virtual open houses, which for our British and Australian colleagues are open days, right? So how do you recreate the feeling of taking a campus tour online? How do you recreate the ability to interact with faculty, with fellow students? How do you get the feeling for a campus when you're not physically there and when you cannot be physically there? So that's one of the very concrete examples of things that we're doing. We're also going into virtual graduations as well. And how do we create probably the most important event in a student's life and bring it to a digital space that creates the memories and that creates the emotional connection that the physical graduation would create when you get to toss the hat in the air and sort of move on with your life. So I think those are two legitimate concrete examples that I could refer to.
So we're all going to be sitting in our rooms throwing our laptops into the air and damaging them by getting carried away.
Hopefully, if I do it right.
Excellent. Mattia, again, for the moment, thank you very, very much. So you've had 2 predictions so far, guys. You've had Danielle talking about fluidity and roles and responsibilities and how we work. And you've had Mattia talking about the need to create, using online to create the equivalent of physical experiences, because we're not going to be able to create them in the same way that we used to be able to do physically. So that's the new world that he sees coming up in the future. That's super. So we've heard 2. And thirdly, now I'm going to ask Amy Ballard if she'd come back on stage. And Amy, I know you want to talk a little bit about engagement and relationships and things like that. So as your prediction, so I'm looking forward to hearing that. But first of all, tell us a bit more about yourself and how on earth you ended up down in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Sure. So I'm a hotelier for the last 23 years. And so by nature, I'm a nomad. I was born in Arizona, and here I am back in Arizona, all these years later, after living and working in Dallas and New York and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles and Vancouver. And so I guess I've gathered experiences throughout those years in very different places, always leaning into the sales and marketing side of the business. So yeah, very happy to be opening this beautiful new property in Scottsdale, Arizona.
No, it sounds marvelous. And so come on, tell us about your prediction then. What do you see in the future that we're all going to have to be aware of and take control of?
Well, I think mine is born out of just observing this time right now with COVID and how we have seen businesses, we've peeked behind the curtain of even the most coveted businesses in the world. We've peeked behind the curtain of Marriott. We've peeked behind the curtain of CNN. We've watched Chris Cuomo when he should be homesick. We've actually watched him broadcast in a t-shirt, sweating in his basement, right? And so we've watched Arne Sorensen, who's the president and CEO of Marriott, our president and CEO. We've seen him vulnerable, bald head, having battled cancer, speaking from the heart and emotional, talking about how he's so sorry that he's having to lay off all of these associates and that he's there and that he loves us, right? So, normally marketing the content, I guess my prediction is along the lines of the content that we will be producing, that as consumers now, we're relating to companies from the heart. We've stripped back, we've seen behind the curtain, we've demystified these large companies. And I think we're still gonna see people wishing to connect in that way. I know Matthew was just talking about sort of connecting from the heart, these genuine connections. And so I think we're gonna see a movement from people relating to marketing from even the largest companies, the glossy and scripted sort of marketing, to a more genuine and authentic display of marketing. So I think it's going to be around the content that I see shifting. You know, we no longer want to see that sort of glassed over layer of a company. We want to interact with companies from the heart. So I think COVID has sort of thrown us all in that arena, and I can't imagine that we're going to just flip the switch back and market the same way we have.
So it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, you know, one of the things that's always been talked about in marketing over recent years is more personal relationships and more individual and personalized marketing. And it's tended to be quite mechanical. You know, you get a set of data in, you identify individual and you send them out whatever you think is the right thing for that particular group. But I think what you're talking about is a move to something much more advanced than that. It sounds like you really are talking about, actually, it's about you're talking to a person with a name now as an individual, and as including within companies.
Yes, exactly. That's where, you know, my prediction isn't just through one medium. You know, I'm not saying social is going to take off even more than it has, because social is sort of where we've always been able to quickly get out authentic marketing. I think it's going to infiltrate throughout all mediums, all levels of marketing. I don't think there's a medium that it's not going to touch. I think the idea is that we're going to start speaking and connecting from the heart, because we just live together through a global experience. At what point in time can you be sitting in Scotland and I be sitting in Paradise Valley, Arizona, and we both have been confined to our homes, having to broadcast in business, you know, from our homes? Like, you have the exact same experience I do, and you live across the world. We're living the human experience together collectively, and it's bonding us in a way that nothing has ever bonded us before in our lifetime. So I think we can't ignore that, and I think we need to keep this connection going, where we say we understand you, and whatever it is our business provides, we need to speak from the heart and express ourselves that way. And I think that is what consumers will expect after what we've just been through together, and I think that that's what we should be delivering to our customers, right? That it's and also I think we'll all come out of this. I know in the hotel industry, we're like the airlines, right? We've laid off 90% of our associates in the hotel industry right now. You know, Marriott's closed 1,000 hotels. And so more than ever, we're going to be grateful for every single person that checks in. So I think, again, we're going to be operating from the heart. We're going to have a sense of gratitude across the world that we've never, you know, collectively had.
I really liked your comment also about what's going to happen inside organizations. I think this idea of being able to see the senior management as human beings rather than the names on an organization chart, or highly spruced up for the corporate video and just coming across, you know, let me talk to my people, you know, sort of thing. To actually see them as real people, I think that's got to be good news, hasn't it?
I mean, I can say, you know, we had the Arne Sorensen video where I just mentioned before. That originally just came out as a video to us. He often sends videos out to us, you know, and as the associates, and that's how we kind of communicate with him. But that one went viral. Forbes picked it up. Everyone picked it up, right? Because you don't often, he was one of the first examples of a CEO that just stripped away and exposed his heart, right? I can say that there's been multiple videos from our own company. We're all in our living rooms, but senior leaders, you know, I've sat here in tears with David Marriott saying the words, "I love you" to us. You know, CEOs usually say those words, but you could tell he was so choked up. I mean, his family has run this Marriott for 100 years, right? And he talked about how this is worse, how this is harder on us than the Great Depression, all these things. And so to have him look at us, and usually words can come out from a CEO and you just sort of brush it over, but you felt that in your heart because you could see that he actually felt it, because we're living the same experience together. So yeah, I definitely think it's broad, internal, external.
It's really interesting. I mean, I think this personal connection is so important. I mean, I learned a lot from the chief executive I worked most closely with, I guess, before I moved into CEO roles myself, was a guy called Colin Marshall that used to run British Airways. And he would be down on the baggage ramps talking to the baggage handlers at 6 o'clock in the morning and just having a chat. And they could see he was a human being, as opposed to another chief exec that came later on that sat in his office and sent out missives, you know, and the difference in loyalty and engagement, and it was just huge. And it was a huge lesson to me. I mean, when I went to places like Eurostar, I mean, I went out on the trains and talked to the train managers and the train drivers and things like that, because it's the only way you really got to see your own people, and they got to know that you know, you weren't just a name on a door, you were actually somebody who could talk to them. So I think if there's one good thing that comes out of this, maybe it is the fact that we actually open up the relationships a lot more than we have before. Excellent. Well, look, we've got kind of 3 different ideas ideas going on in there, guys. We've got talking about with Danielle, we've talked about roles and responsibilities and how things are going to change, and we've got to become much more fluid, and the kind of reimagining almost the roles and the department of the future. We've got Matteo, who's talked about the kind of the physical experience and how can we replicate what previously had always been physical experiences that we now have to try and do online where we can. And you've had Amy talking about engagement and relationships, and she's been talking particularly about how it's becoming much more personal and more human because everything has kind of been stripped back through this. So that's going to go on to the poll in a minute or two, and I don't think it's quite up yet from looking at my screen here, but in a minute or two the 3 predictions will go up onto the polling section of your screen. Do go in and have a vote. I believe there's even a prize that one of you will get. I have no idea what it is, but I believe one of you will get a prize for whoever's prediction gets the most votes. But we'll see what that is. I think they're all actually very, very valid looks into the future. But so do everybody go in and have a look at that, and do add something to the questions. There's nobody's added anything in the questions box yet. So if there's anything that arises that you would like to ask these guys about, or that you think are questions that we should look at in future sessions, please do type them into that questions box, because we'd love to hear from you. There's 50 or 60 of you out there at the moment, and it'd be great to hear from you in terms of your thoughts and your ideas. Oh, I've just had a dot that's just appeared by my poll button. So, there we go. The poll is up and running, so you can vote now, guys. So on you get. In the meantime, and while you're polling, I'm going to have more of a broader conversation with our guests here, seeing as how we've got them as a captive audience for a while. First question, general question, then I want to ask each of you some bits and pieces about your roles. One of the things that interests me, and I know certainly interests Vision Critical, our sponsors, is this whole area of customer insight. What have you noticed, or what are you doing differently in the last few weeks about actually getting out there and understanding your customers? Because it's not our world that's changed, it's everybody's world that's changed. So presumably, all of our customers have changed. So are you doing anything at the moment to get out there and discover what's changed for them? Or how are you finding out what to do next? Anybody can go?
Yeah, I can start. We're approaching this 2 different ways, so quantitatively and qualitatively. So if I think about quantitatively, we run a whole bunch of models predicting behavior around who's going to respond to what promotions. Obviously, the needs that you have when we're helping our partners sell a loyalty currency that normally you would earn and burn primarily on a travel activity tends to change. So our predictions around who is most likely to respond to a communication changes. So all of our modeling around propensity to respond has to shift depending on the characteristics of those customers of the day. And then qualitatively, we're actually just about to launch a survey. So for people who are still buying currencies, we want to know why, and we're specifically asking them. It's an exit intent survey, and we're trying to find out what is the thing that's motivating you now. You're not buying a point or a mile from one of our partners because you've just taken a flight and you need to shore up your balance. So we're asking things like, are you thinking about loyalty currency because you're thinking about future travel? And we're trying to figure out, for those people taking advantage of our promotions right now, what is motivating them. So we're doing it qual and quant on that.
I have to say, actually, my biggest question for the loyalty scheme industry is that I travel the world a lot, well, up until about 6 weeks ago when it all suddenly came to a crashing halt. And I'm very pleased to get the benefits of being a British Airways Gold Card guest list member or whatever. What I want to know is when I don't reach the points total in my year end at the beginning of August to retain my gold membership, are they going to let me keep it or not? Because I couldn't travel. And that's a very important question for me.
But you know what it is? And that goes into the emotions that both Matteo and Amy talked about, right? We each have those things that are so super important to us. And every airline is dealing with it differently. Some of them are letting you purchase points to get up to your status. Some of them are letting you just retain your status. So I think a lot of thinking is going in around what's important to someone in a loyalty program and how do we make sure to continue to keep them engaged and recognize the space that we're currently in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just if you get in touch with British Airways, just let them know that the idea of just letting people retain their status is a really, really good scheme. How about the other? Yeah, thank you. Get on the phone for me, please. how about the other two? Either of you got any thoughts on how do you keep in contact with customers, because their world's changing so rapidly as well?
Well, in our case, I think there was quite a bit of adaptation to do in terms of not just transferring, as I said, the learning going online, but also the relationship between the teachers and the learners, and the relationship between the campus and the learners, and all the resources that were on site that now had to be shifted. So to the extent that students are our customers, even though I sometimes resent calling them that, I think there's a lot of learning to go on both sides. We're learning on one side what really made students tick in terms of our campus experience, but we also need to provide our customers with, hey, by the way, there are all these new ways that you can learn that are available to you, and here's what we can do, and here's what we can't do in an industry where, education is still regulated by government. So we're still sometimes, limited in terms of what we can do. So we need to get really creative. But the thing we're learning about our customers, I think, is the most for us is the desire to continue learning and the desire to make things work, both on the side of the teachers and the students, has been really, really tremendous. And there's really been, a global effort in the part of everyone involved to make this work and to carry on the mission of education. So I think that's been a revelation, I think, for a lot of people in our industry, the willingness that all parties have been to sort of push this forward and to keep going.
No, that's a very good point. Amy, just before I bring you in on this one, I just want to say we've actually reached 2 o'clock now. So I know some people have got to go. I hope others will be able to stay on. We can stay on for another 15 minutes or so before we get kicked off the air, I think. But for those that you have got to go, just to say thank you very much for listening in. Hopefully there'll be some more of these in the future where we'll be able to hit home in on different topics. Thank you again to our sponsors, Vision Critical, for allowing us to do this. And most importantly, thank you to Danielle, to Mathieu, and to Amy for taking part and being able to. I'll thank you again at the end, but I'm thanking you now before some people have to disappear at the half hour. So I just wanted to get that in quickly before we move on. And I can see some comments and questions are starting to come up. So let's carry on then. Amy, what about you? Customers, staying in touch. We haven't got any customers at the moment, have you?
Oh, we do. You know what? A big part of our customer base in the hotel industry are meeting planners, right? So you mentioned at the beginning of this call that this call normally wouldn't be a call. It would be taking place at a hotel with there being a stage and 100 people gathered and things like that. So that's actually a huge core part of all of our business. And so those meeting planners are the ones that I'm engaging with before our business is even open, because they plan these events, a year or two in advance. And right now we're forbidden from allowing people to gather. So it's interesting. So I'm laughing because, it's kind of making us live in the 1800s again, right? People are learning how to bake bread again. You're living in your house, you're baking bread and doing all these things. Well, we're picking up the phone and calling people. We're not relying on email and email blasts and all those things to engage with our customers. It goes back to the heart-to-heart sort of connection again. So where we can, we're picking up the phone, where we can engage in person, but we're getting as close to the person as we can. And so at this point in time, it's picking up the phone and it's having conversations heart-to-heart with our customers. So where we can, we do that so that we can engage, and understand them and express how we're going to evolve to adapt to their fears and their concerns.
Interesting. Yeah. We've got some questions starting to come in now. Okay, we've got one or two. One question I thought was quite interesting. It just come up a minute ago. Yeah. Somebody asked about advertising. What have you seen out there at the moment that's the good and the bad of what people have been trying to do in advertising during the downturn, during the crisis? Have there been some good examples of people that seem to have adapted their message or done some good stuff, or are there some that you think got it wrong? I'll give you a minute to think while you're thinking about it. The one I can think of in the UK that's really, really, I have to say, irritated me more than anything is there's been one or two companies that have come out in support, fantastically, of the NHS, the National Health Service workers, and there's one phone company that says, you can have, free texts or whatever for the next 6 months if you're an NHS worker, etc. That's great. I'm very pleased they're doing it. but why do you need to make a television advert about it and go out to the whole nation telling people you're doing it? You know, if you're going to do it, and if it's a good idea, do it. But it just grated with me a bit. I have to say that it was almost jumping on the back. Look at us, aren't we wonderful in helping the NHS? And I have to say that one irritated me a bit. So that's an example of the bad. Maybe you've seen some good. I don't know.
That's a good point. Yeah.
You know, I to kind of look in Amy's direction on this one. I really did. I think that the Marriott's, the Bonvoy campaign was a We Will Travel Again campaign, and I thought that it was a really wonderful piece of content that stuck with me, and I'm missing traveling. And I think that the thing that it did really well was it made the thing you were talking about before, that collective experience of us all experiencing that same thing. I thought it did a really great job of being emotional and yet being sensitive to the time. And so, yeah, that would be my standout.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, anybody? Okay, well, let's see what else we've got up here. Oh, here's an interesting one from Aki asking, how will the CFOs and boards, as the guardians of risk, change, do you think, coming out of this? Will they support new developments or be even more cautious as we move forward to avoid trying to avoid going back into the hole? I have to say, actually, my experience in the downturn in the early 90s, which of course was nothing like as bad as now, was that the organizations that focused on the long term and focused on the development opportunities and did as much business as usual rather than firefighting were the ones that came out the strongest. I mean, BA certainly benefited from that during the 90s. I mean, I inherited that. I joined in 93 into British Airways, and I inherited all the great work that had been done in 91 and 92, so I got the credit for the work everybody else had done earlier on. You know, it was fantastic. So I think this is the time to actually get in with the development stuff, but maybe you disagree. I don't know. Maybe you've got stronger finance or risk departments than me.
You know what?
Nacho was going to come in there.
Go ahead, Nacho. I'll pick him up here.
I was just going to say, I'm glad I'm not a CFO right now. This is not an easy time to have that job, and it's not an easy time to be sort of for me, I think the balancing act between, you know, sort of preserving cash flow and preserving operations in the short run, and then being able to look, you know, further down the road to your point, Amish, and saying, you know, we're gonna do as much business as we could. We're gonna focus on growth. We're gonna focus on all of that. But at the same time, you do need to keep a certain mindfulness with the current cash flow and the ability to operate the business today, tomorrow, and next week. But I do think that change and transformation will be accelerated as we move forward. I think that the biggest word that starts with C that's going to drive innovation isn't CTO, CIO, CMO, or CEO. It's going to be COVID. So I think that it's going to have to change, and the forward-thinking boards are the ones that are going to come out ahead. But there is a reality that these guys do have to manage the short-term cash flow and keep the business running next week, or we won't get the next month. So I can really appreciate the work they're doing. And again, let me reiterate how happy I am that I'm not the one that has to do it.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's a balance. You know, I mean, I don't worry. Don't get me wrong. I give the CFOs a hard time when I do CFO. I do chair some of these CFO forums as well. I always give them a hard time about, wouldn't it be better to listen to the people who create the numbers rather than you guys who just add them up? But actually, they do have a tough job. Of course, they do. And I think, but I have heard cases, though, of clamping down. I've got one of my clients in Europe who have physically stopped supplying some of their customers because they've done a risk assessment that says that questions whether that customer is going to, be able to pay on the normal payment terms or whatever. And I'm just thinking to myself, is that the smartest move at the moment? Who's that customer going to go to in the future? If you don't support them during the hard times, who are they going to go to when all of this ends? So I think, I think there is a balance where you're right. You've got to keep the business going. You've got to get the costs under control. But you maybe have to take a few risks more than you would take otherwise if you still want to have some customers at the end of it all.
Yeah,
so Danielle, you were going to come in.
Risk is situational, right? And sometimes it's actually more risky to do the safe thing, especially when the world is as it is right now. I mean, your definition of risk absolutely has to change, and you run the risk of destroying your business if you don't bend and change with what the times what the times need. And in a certain now, I mean, especially in travel, it's risky to just wait and expect things to change. If I go back to Points' origins, tragic situation like 9/11, where people stopped flying, made airlines need to think about, how am I going to earn ancillary revenue? And that is a situation that that our company was born out of, and our success was born out of, because it was our job to help our partners try to figure out how they could earn revenue when people weren't flying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the airports were in a similar situation. I did a lot of work with Heathrow when they were building their new Terminal 5 in London Heathrow Airport. And there is no doubt whatsoever that getting the shopping right was as important as getting the facilities for the airlines right. It was the auxiliary incomes that were really the critical ones. Amy, I want to turn to you now and ask you, linked to that, you talked earlier on about the quality of the engagement and how relationships are going to change. And I see there's one question that somebody's come up with here, talking about driving value to customers through engagement. And are there any thoughts that you can share about how that works for the brand? Because for a lot of us at the moment, all we can do is engage with our customers. We can't sell them anything. We can't deliver to them. So have you any thoughts about the value of engagement, and whether or not you can measure it? I don't know. That was the second half of the question from Andrew there, was, can you measure against the bottom line? But I mean, what is the added value of the engagement from your point of view? Because you're having to presumably do a lot of that at the moment before you start.
Definitely. Yes. Oh gosh, there's so many layers to this. So I'm thinking from my sort of small one hotel perspective, right? And then also looking up from an entire company perspective. So to Danielle's point, the company brand said, it's not time to hard sell. It's an inappropriate time to encourage people to travel to hotels in mass, because they're not allowed to do that. So instead, let's just all inspire and dream of getting out of our homes again and reigniting this passion for travel. And so, I don't have the hard data numbers in my seat right now, but I can say that I think that was a smart move, and it came from the heart. It was born from the heart to say, hey, you know what? Let's just put a message out there that is genuinely coming from our heart. This is, we all dream of traveling again, because we love to travel as hoteliers, but we also dream of the day when we can welcome you back, because as hoteliers, we have a heart for hospitality and we want to welcome you back. And so, I think I agree with Danielle that I think that was a great campaign. And then again, I go back to us engaging with our customers in forums like this, where we're seeing their faces and asking for their feedback. A big part of our business again is meetings, right? So if you can remember the last time you went to a conference and you sat in a crowd of 500 people sitting theater style, it's definitely not 6 foot apart. So right now we're having to imagine a giant part of our business and how will meetings look in the future. So we're having to turn around and operationalize change while explaining to our business partners and meeting planners, how are we going to operate your next conference? And be mindful of social distancing. And so we have conversations just like this. We bring our best customers together and we sit in forums, and they're in their living rooms, and our leaders are in their living rooms, and we're just having dialogue and saying, how do we change our industry together? And it's not a flashy way of doing things. It's like this, it's just personal connection.
Isn't it? If you're not working with
exactly.
But what I also like is the fact that you're talking about selling the future. You're selling future dreams to people. And I think that's something that a lot of us are having to get used to at the present moment.
Yes.
The future may be 6 months away, but we'll wait and see.
We're inspiring right now.
Absolutely. We're going to have to wind up in just a minute or two. But just a thought, I guess. I mean, first of all, for those of you that are still listening in that are not familiar with CMO and the forums that are done, these are day-long forums where you actually get a time to actually meet with. It's not just a panel of 3 people talking at you. There's actually an awful lot of time for exchange during the day, where you meet with your peers, you discuss different issues, and then we have a predictions panel, and we have other panels going on during the day as well. Well worth it. I found them very useful, the ones that I've either keynoted at or moderated at, because they are a chance to think not just about, what am I doing for my marketing programs, but they're also a chance to think, I think, also about my own career and what I'm trying to achieve, and talking to other people in a similar situation. So I think for personal development can be useful. But most important, and I think the thing that we really all need to work on, is this issue about how we better influence the rest of the business. Marketing should be the most important function. Why is it then that most of the chief executives of the big companies in the UK come from the finance route? You know, I don't. I'm very unusual in the UK, having come up through marketing to chief exec. Most of them came through the finance route because they've got the ear of the city, they're well known or whatever. That shouldn't be happening. I think there's time for a revolution, guys. We need marketing to start taking control. We are the only function that really, really matters in a business, because if you've got no customers, you've got no business. So I'm very keen that these forums carry on and that you guys talk to each other, and between us, we create that revolution at some point. In finishing up, I guess a couple of things to say. First of all, thank you very, very much indeed to Danielle, to Mattia, and to Amy. I really appreciate the fact that you stood up, took the time to do this. It's the first time we've done the CMO online in Canada, so really appreciate the fact that you were willing to be the guinea pigs on this one, and you have excelled and set the bar far too high for everybody else in the future. But no, thank you so much for the comments and for everything you've thrown in there. Thank you, obviously, to CXO for organising these things. Thank you to our sponsors, as I said, Vision Critical, for helping us out and making this possible. And I hope, Kristen, if you're listening in, you got one or two insights on customer insight and things we should be doing about for customers. I sincerely hope there'll be some more of these. I haven't seen the plans yet. I know there are plans to try and keep them going as much as possible until we're able to do the physical ones again, which roll on. I love my trips to Canada. I shall be looking forward to coming back over there, providing I've still got a job after tonight's one. But most of all, thank you so much for listening in, those of you who listened in. I know a lot of you have stayed on for the extra 15 minutes, so thank you for that. And we very much look forward to seeing you again. And if you've got any questions or thoughts that you want to add in the future for future events, please do. If you'd like to volunteer to be on one of the panels in the future, then please do that as well. Just let the team know. But for the moment, thank you very much, everybody. I'm afraid we have to call it a halt now because somebody else wants the airtime. But thank you so much, and good night from Scotland and good afternoon in Canada. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, bye.